New York Islander fans are absolutely livid as the NHL trade deadline is over and several of the Islanders' top tradable assets still remain on the team. We're going to be talking about that on this episode of Islanders Digest and really breaking down why the Islanders did not trade all these assets and whether or not this was the right decision for the Islanders to make. But before we get into that, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be one of our first 100 subscribers. If you're an Islander fan and you want more Islanders content, this is the channel for you. Now, after the Islanders started the deadline with a huge trade, sending Brock Nelson to Colorado, a lot of people assumed that it would be a fire sale in New York, and most of the Islanders' other tradable assets short-term would definitely be for sale, and the Islanders would really be tearing down this group. That is not what happened. Earlier today, we got some reports that the Islanders were trying to re-sign Kyle Palmieri instead of trading him, and that's definitely looking like what it's going to happen. Pierre LeBrun was the first to report that the Islanders have told Kyle Palmieri that they were not going to trade him. That ended up coming true. Instead, it now sounds like the Islanders and Kyle Palmieri are working towards an extension under the money he currently makes. So this does look like it's going to be a team-friendly contract, but most Islander fans were not happy with this. They were really hoping to get a first-round pick for Kyle Palmieri. To be honest, I don't know if a first-round pick was available for Kyle Palmieri. I know you can say a lot of players that were lesser than Kyle Palmieri did fetch second-round picks, and I can definitely see maybe he would fetch a second-round pick and a third or something like that, but it really seems like those teams that had first-round picks were not willing to trade those first-round picks. I mean, just look at what the Florida Panthers had to give up for Brad Marchand. They only had to give up a conditional second-round pick that becomes a first-round pick if they win 2 rounds and he plays half the games, and that's a first-round pick in 2028. So if Brad Marchand cannot receive a higher first-round pick in a more recent draft, or a draft coming up, then Kyle Palmieri definitely wasn't going to command too much. And honestly, I know a lot of Islander fans are upset about this. I don't think this is the worst decision. I don't think it was the best idea for the Islanders to completely tear down this team. I really think that would not be best for the Islanders. I mean, if we look at Kyle Palmieri's stats, Kyle Palmieri in particular, this season he has 20 goals with the Islanders. Last season he had 32 goals with the Islanders. And after his first 2 years with the Islanders, Kyle Palmieri has really seemed, even though he's getting older, he has really seemed to fit in with his role. Now this was playing with Brock Nelson, but I definitely think we will get similar results for Kyle Palmieri with him playing with a player perhaps like Matt Barzal or Bo Horvat. I definitely think, honestly, especially with the cap going up, these 20 goal scorers are going to get a lot more expensive. I think we're definitely seeing that. I think that's one of the reasons why the Penguins ended up holding on to Raquel. It's just like, now the cap is going up, these players are going to be getting a lot more money than you are going to think as a fan. And it is definitely encouraging that at least if the Islanders are going to keep Kyle Palmieri, it sounds like he's going to take a team-friendly deal. So maybe getting a team-friendly goal scorer that's going to score 20 goals for $4.5 million is really going to save the Islanders money down the line, because realistically, if you trade Kyle Palmieri, you have to replace him in the lineup. You have to have goals in your lineup, and the player that replaces Kyle Palmieri is definitely going to be more expensive than Kyle Palmieri. Realistically, he might be younger, but he's going to be more expensive. I don't think this is the worst move. Now, there were some other players Islander fans really wanted to see moved. Among some, they definitely want to see a defenseman moved. Some people really want to see Noah Dobson moved. I really don't think it would be a good idea to trade Noah Dobson on the deadline. Honestly, I don't think it is a great idea to trade Noah Dobson at all. It has been fun to talk about what Noah Dobson could command in a trade, but realistically, you're not going to get a player better than Noah Dobson in a trade, and when you're trading the best player in a trade, it definitely does not work out for your team. Noah Dobson has so much potential as a young defenseman. He can definitely still grow into a better player. Think it makes sense the Islanders keep him. Other defensemen, I do think it's a little strange that the Islanders held on to 9 defensemen. I mean, they have Tony DeAngelo they held on Peronovich, Boquist, Riley they have coming back from injury. But let me point out here, one of the reasons why the Islanders might have decided to hold on to all these players is they got DeAngelo and he went through waivers and no team picked him up. Boquist went through waivers up to the Islanders. No one else picked him up. The Islanders traded only a 5th round pick for Perunovich, and they do have control of him in the future. So perhaps they do see him as a long-term project that they can improve on. realistically, maybe the reasons why the Islanders did not make a trade on defense is it really would not have landed a good return. Now, on forward, it is a little bit of a different story. Lee would definitely command some value. Pageau would also command some value. But if you look at their contracts, these are two players that still have term with the Islanders. Both these players are going to be back next season, so why trade them now? Especially, it's going to maybe be more difficult to trade Anders Lee's $7 million contract without retaining money. The same goes for Pageau's $5 million contract. Why would you want to retain money on these contracts, money that you couldn't use next season, and you would have to replace these players in your lineup? Again, the Islanders do want to be competitive next season. With Barzal being signed, with Horvat being signed, Sorokin, Dobson, they're going to have a new contract for Romanov. With all these core players, it does not make sense for the Islanders to go full rebound mode. They are going to have to try to retool on the fly, and you're not going to want to strip your roster if you're doing that. And if they're going to trade these players away, you'd end up just using the assets you got for these players to replace them, which really doesn't make sense. Also, if they are going to be bringing in Richie next season, you definitely want to have a strong group of veterans around a young player like that. You don't want to throw them into the fire like Chicago is doing with a lot of their young players. It really hasn't worked well. And on top of all this, you really have to consider that the Islanders are currently in a playoff push. Now, I know it is a long shot that the New York Islanders make the playoffs. I understand that. But at the end of the day, the Islanders are only 4 points out. They are 4 points out. They have a game in hand on a lot of the teams in front of them. At this point, with all the assets that the Boston Bruins sold, Boston Bruins are basically out of it. Montreal Canadiens are riding a hot streak. They did lose their last game, but before that, they did win their past 5. That being said, this is a young, inconsistent roster. The Detroit Red Wings really look like a mess right now, especially after not having the best deadline. In addition, not shown, the Devils in the 3rd place position in the Metro are falling apart without Jack Hughes and now Dougie Hamilton. It is not crazy to say that the Islanders will have a shot at making the playoffs, especially considering they've done it in the past. Now, I don't think it's likely, and I don't think the Islanders, they made the right decision not buying for a playoff run, but the Islanders are definitely going to try to be competitive, and I definitely think that's the right thing to do, because we've seen disasters. We've seen these teams that have tried to sell all their assets, and they never go well. You know what? There's a team that has gone through a lot of fire sales recently, the Buffalo Sabres. And every single season, the Buffalo Sabres fall short because on top of all the poor moves they make, they've developed a losing culture by not fielding a competitive roster, and that is really hard to overcome. The Islanders have a really good locker room, and especially after losing Nelson, I think it was still important to retain that. Now, another player I definitely want to talk about that Islander fans wanted to trade that they didn't, and I think it was the right decision not to trade this player, is Scott Mayfield. Now, a lot of Islander fans picked, I said before, that a lot of the defensemen on this list either would not command value or do have trade protection. Now, Scott Mayfield also does have trade protection, but Islander fans really still picked him as a player who could get assets this season. And the big problem with that is, sure, I think the Islanders could have maybe got a 2nd round pick or something for Scott Mayfield, but would that really be worth it? And now, before you say that Scott Mayfield is a terrible defenseman, let's really look at his stats and determine whether or not this is the case, because I think it'd surprise you how effective Scott Mayfield has been this season. Now, he has missed a few games, but he's been relatively healthy. Out of all the Islanders defensemen, he has been the most healthy defenseman this season. And considering all the injured Islanders we've had this season, that is a very important factor to consider. He has played 53 games, and I know the points are not outstanding. 2 points, 5 assists. You know what? He's supposed to be a defenseman. His goal is not to score goals. His goal is to keep goals out of the net. And you know what? You might not like it, but if you look at these stats, Scott Mayfield has been one of the Islanders' better defensemen over the past few years, in fact. Now, when he first signed his contract, that was in his year 30 season, 2022-2023, he had 24 points, and if you look, he was a +8. And the Islanders that year, they were a negative team, and this year they are also a negative team. So all the Islander fans saying that Scott Mayfield is the problem with this team, if you look at his stats right now, Scott Mayfield is a +14. And if the Islanders are a -15 team, if we look at the standings, the Islanders are a -15 team. How is it, or they're a -14 team now, how is it that Scott Mayfield is the problem with this team allowing too many goals if he is a +10 when he's on the ice? And he's not scoring goals. That's him playing solid defensively. He's playing he's playing 17 minutes a night. He's playing good hard minutes. He's a big, strong, physical defenseman. There's a reason teams wanted this player. And sure, maybe you can say the Islanders are giving him a little too much money, but right now he's actually playing for his worth, especially if you look at some of these contracts that are going to get handed out around the league, and especially as this cap is going to skyrocket up. That's a big thing you have to consider, especially with the Islanders trying to re-sign Palmieri. With the cap going up, we're going to be seeing some absolutely crazy contracts coming up. We've already begun to see some players who really don't seem to be worth that much money getting a lot more money. And really, Scott Mayfield's contract is not looking like a problem. And especially with the Islanders in a playoff hunt, I think it definitely makes sense for the Islanders to hold on to him, especially considering Scott Mayfield has more years on his contract. If you decide next season that you want to move him, assuming that he waives his no trade protection, you definitely can still move him. It's not like these players are going to lose value over a lot night. Same with Pageau and Anders Lee. I don't think it is the right decision to trade both these players, but even if you did think that the right decision was to trade these players for asset, you can make the argument that next season they would be worth more assets because the Islanders could retain half their salaries and command a better return. Right now, with another year on Lee's contract at $7 million, you are not getting top assets. Now, you might have gotten more assets for Jean-Gabriel Pageau because he is a center, and this was a seller's market desperately looking for centers. But you know what? Then the Islanders would not have any centers on their roster. Look at the lineup this season, right? Pageau is playing as the second center. Do you really want to watch an on-ice product for the rest of the season, or at least until Matt Barzal returns with Casey Ciziquez as your second line center? It would be an absolute disaster, and it would not be a competitive roster, and especially if you want to bring in young kids next season, that's not the type of roster you want to have to foster their growth. And again, I do think this would be a different situation, even if it was clear that Matt Barzal was not returning this season. That is not the case. The Islanders are 4 points out of the playoffs, and they're getting their franchise center back, which means they're going to have a shot at this. I know they're not going to really realistically win a playoff round without Brock Nelson, but it would be nice for the culture of this group to get back into the playoffs and really show some compete. And honestly, Islander fans are always talking about how they want to sign free agents. You want to know how you attract free agents? If you have a good end of the season and really show these guys that you can win. Because all these players, there's going to be a lot of money, especially considering the cap went up. And if you throwing around money is not going to help you land these free agents, because every team has money. What's really going to help you land a free agent is showing that you can be competitive, that you can make a playoff push. Then even if you don't make it, that winning culture really has an impact. We saw what happened last season when the Islanders had a terrible end to the season. It actually cost them this season, because the Islanders came into this season, and they really had some of the issues that they developed in last year's season. They were still struggling to hold leads, and even though the Islanders made playoffs, they never really fixed those issues. You do not want to go into the end of the season developing bad habits because you don't have the best roster available. That's what teams like the Buffalo Sabres do. That's why they're on the bottom of the league. The Islanders, Lou Lamoriello, does not do that. While I would have loved to see a return for Kyle Palmieri, the fact that it seems pretty clear that they're going to re-sign them, I am pretty happy with that. I don't think the Islanders ruin their future by not trading Anders Lee and JG Pageau. With that being said, let me know what you think in the comments. What were your opinions on this Islanders deadline? Were you pissed that more players were not moved? Were you pissed that Brock Nelson was moved? And did you really want to see the team stay together? I really want to know your thoughts on this deadline, so let me know in the comments. If you're not already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And as always, let's go Islanders.